Deep Sea Embers Chapter 386 to 390. The grand and imposing ship, known as the White Oak, had gracefully settled on the expansive, shimmering surface of the endless sea. Its movement stilled, it appeared to rest peacefully amidst the gentle swaying of the waters. Just a little ways off, its sister ship, given the ominous name, Black Oak, had likewise stopped in its tracks. It was ensnared in a heavy, dense fog that seemed to cast an enigmatic spell around it. The mysterious silhouette it created bore an uncanny resemblance to the eerie depictions of phantom ships in age-old seafarers' tales. The vague outlines of the Black Oak seemed to extend an almost tangible but cryptic invitation, subtly persuasive yet tinged with an element of hidden threat. Captain Lawrence, a mariner of substantial experience and many sea voyages, directed his gaze towards the obscured craft. His countenance hinted at a twinge of uneasiness, an uncharacteristic display of doubt that even the seasoned captain could not fully hide. "Should we send a team over for a closer look?" First Mate Gus proposed, his voice cutting through the prevalent silence like a sharp blade. His words seemed to shake Lawrence from his deep reverie, pushing the looming uncertainty aside for a moment. Turning his attention towards Gus, Lawrence was greeted with the sight of a man who had been a reliable ally through countless storms and dangerous voyages for over 20 years. "You noticed it too, didn't you? Our last encounter with it was near frost," Gus recalled, his gaze lost in the undulating sea before them. His voice wavered with a complicated blend of emotions as he continued, "After all these years, we veterans have known about your situation. But no one had the courage to talk about it openly." In response, Lawrence fell into brief silence before finally breaking the stillness. His voice came out soft, almost whispered, "Do you remember, not so long ago, when you saw a shadowy figure standing beside me on the deck?" Caught off guard by the question, Gus stuttered a bit before managing to reply, "That was Martha." Lawrence cut him off, his voice just barely louder than the murmur of the sea around them. His words took Gus by surprise, causing his eyes to widen in astonishment. "The same, Martha, that only I could see for all these years. I've seen her on board more frequently of late, and I heard her voice when we were near Dagger Island. At first, I thought this peculiar region of the sea was amplifying my hallucinations. But now, it seems the reality might be more intricate." Slowly, Gus redirected his gaze towards the fog-covered Black Oak. It stood in the midst of the fog, its stillness akin to that of a cemetery. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally spoke, "This isn't an illusion. It's here, it's real." Upon hearing Gus's assertion, Lawrence's face hardened, a clear sign of him grappling with the gravity of the situation. After a few moments of deliberation, he finally gave an order, "Signal them, let's see how they react." "Aye, Captain," Gus promptly agreed. Without delay, a pattern of lights on the flank of the White Oak sprung to life. The ghostly figures of the crew manipulated the shutter in front of the ship's searchlight, throwing a structured series of bright flashes towards the nearby, cloaked, ghost ship. Upon the bridge of the White Oak, Captain Lawrence stood with unwavering resolve, his gaze deeply locked onto the shrouded location of the enigmatic Black Oak. He was suspended in a state of anticipation, eager yet fearful of the sign or response that he sought. "Martha, are you there?" Lawrence quietly murmured to himself, his grip on the nearby handrail tightening in anxiety. His whispered words seemed to linger in the air, echoing like a silent plea to either himself or perhaps a phantom from his past. In the suspense-filled silence that followed, a solitary point of light sprung to life amidst the Black Oak's foggy deck. Like a defiant beacon, it pierced through the impenetrable hazy veil that cloaked the ship. After steadfastly holding its position for a few seconds, the light abruptly disappeared, only to resurface a moment later. This pattern was repeated 3 times, evoking the image of a throbbing heartbeat in the midst of the surrounding darkness. "Our signal has been acknowledged," the first mate announced, turning his gaze to Lawrence. His face was a complex canvas of mixed emotions, depicting relief, worry, and a hint of trepidation. "You may stay here, Captain. I'll send a team to investigate." "Negative, I'll go myself," Lawrence overruled, dismissing the suggestion with a resolute wave of his hand. His stern features softened, revealing a firm sense of determination. He had made up his mind. "If this event is truly a result of my deteriorating mental state, it could prove dangerous to any crew member who recklessly boards that ship," This is my burden to bear, and it's my sole responsibility to resolve it. The first mate seemed ready to protest, but witnessing the unwavering determination in Lawrence's eyes, he swallowed his words of caution. Understood, he reluctantly agreed. With a nod of gratitude, Lawrence said, "Help me get ready. I'll need a lantern, rope, weapons, and ammunition, and..." His voice trailed off, and his attention diverted to a console nearby. An entity clothed in an old sailor's uniform appeared to be steeping stealthily towards a rope coil. The figure was trying its best to remain unnoticed, using the shadows cast by the console as a cover. After a moment's contemplation, Lawrence declared, "I should bring it along. It's too risky to leave an unpredictable anomaly aboard the White Oak. There's something unusual about this one." Caught in the act, the entity, known as Anomaly 077, immediately froze in place. Meanwhile, in the icy cityscape of Frost, near the 4th Cemetery, guardians cloaked in black maintained vigilant surveillance over a sewage treatment plant. 2 soldiers were specifically tasked to protect a visibly distressed manager, who was slumped forlornly next to a pipe by the sewage sedimentation tank. Despite his sickly complexion and his body's uncontrollable shivering, he showed a stubborn determination to answer each question the guards presented to him. "I assure you, I'm completely in the dark. I can't comprehend this." The manager of the plant, a balding man in his midlife years, swiped a rivulet of cold sweat from his pallid forehead. His face was a stark canvas portraying the tumultuous terror and confusion seizing him. "Everything here was ordinary. I've known these people for over a day, and there wasn't a hint of odd behavior." "Stay calm, you're just an everyday man. It's not unusual to be deceived by paranormal entities." The interrogating guardian attempted to soothe the petrified man, all the while stealing wary glances towards the empty space next to the sedimentation tank. "Leave these anomalies to the gatekeeper. Miss Agatha should be back soon." The mention of the vacant space inadvertently drew the manager's gaze, causing a resurgence of haunting memories from the near past. The horrifying transformation of the seemingly benign church priests into intimidating strangers, shadowy demons materializing out of thin air, his coworkers at the treatment center morphing into grotesque, humanoid monstrosities, engaging in a violent clash with the guardians draped in black. He visibly shivered at the horrifying remembrance, shutting his eyes tightly as if to expel the dreadful visuals. However, the encompassing darkness behind his eyelids only enhanced his fright. He reluctantly reopened his eyes, the traumatic events still casting a dreadful shadow over him. Seeing the manager's state, a guardian in black could only provide a sympathetic look. The manager had inadvertently become entangled in a concealed nightmare inside the walls of his familiar sewage treatment center, a horror-filled stage featuring merciless cultists and monstrous doppelgangers disguised as his coworkers. It was a testament to his mental fortitude that he had not succumbed to insanity amidst the shocking revelations. It was probable that the imposters, one by one, systematically replaced the treatment center's employees. The manager was likely the last true human amongst them. Had the guardians not intervened in the nick of time, he might have been the next prey of these imposters. This horrifying notion of his narrowly escaped fate intensified the victim's fear. In the aftermath of these events, it seemed implausible that the manager would be able to resume his role at the sewage treatment center. He might even require extensive psychological aid to rebuild his shattered sense of normalcy. But such considerations fell beyond the immediate responsibilities of the guardians. Currently, their foremost concern was the well-being of their superior. Despite gatekeeper Agatha's unquestionable abilities, the vanishing act of 3 supposedly harmless annihilation priests and a dozen doppelganger creatures would naturally stir worry. Her continued absence was increasingly disquieting. Ultimately, even the manager, ensnared in his own vortex of fear and anxiety, noticed the growing tension in the room. Observing the black-clad guardians, each standing in a state of high alert, he mustered the courage to ask, "Excuse me, is the gatekeeper all right?" Miss Agatha is currently immersed in the spirit realm. She was apprehensive that the confrontation between these powerful supernatural beings might pose a risk to you, a common individual, or cause extensive harm to the treatment plant, explained a female guardian. Her voice was resolute and comforting. "Rest assured, no renegade entity can defy the gatekeeper of Bartok in the spirit realm. The delay in her return is likely due to her investigation for more information." The manager responded with a quick, hesitant nod, muttering, "Okay, okay." In the subsequent moment, an icy gust of wind blew across the premises of the plant. The Guardians positioned at the entry points instantaneously redirected their focus towards the vacant area near the sedimentation tank. However, their tense posture was promptly replaced by a wave of relief after recognizing what had happened. "Ah, it seems Miss Agatha has successfully resolved the issue." As her words of reassurance echoed into the silence, ghostly apparitions began to materialize in the barren patch of land adjacent to the sedimentation tank. It was as though a portal to another dimension flickered into existence, with dim, fleeting silhouettes shimmering into being. They hovered for a brief moment before descending to the ground. These ethereal forms solidified in an instant, transforming into tangible beings that landed with a thud on the filth-laden ground. These beings were the remnants of the deceptive creatures and the three priests, now reduced to an unrecognizable sludge. Upon contact with the ground, the remains of the monstrous impostors swiftly disintegrated, rotting away into a stagnant, lifeless residue. Meanwhile, the bodies of the annihilators ignited violently as they re-entered the physical world, charring into remnants within seconds under the assault of searing black flames. The parasitic shadow demons, attempting to take physical form, evaporated into the ether before they could fully manifest. The manager of the sewage treatment plant could do nothing but gawk, astounded at the bizarre spectacle playing out before him. His escalating terror momentarily gave way to stunned disbelief. His attention was then drawn to a tumultuous whirlwind of gray manifesting in the center of the empty space. This whirlwind, a vortex of swirling dust and fog, gave way to a figure within the span of a heartbeat. Emerging from the whirlwind, clad in a black coat and wielding a staff, was the figure. With her body swaddled in bandages, Agatha raised her head, scanning the familiar realities of the physical world and the concerned expressions on her subordinates' faces. "The problem has been resolved," she softly communicated to her subordinates. Her voice was as reassuring and steadfast as it had always been. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. In the palpable, concrete world, the people who had once embodied deviant ideologies and terrifying manifestations in the spiritual domain were now reduced to mere relics and ashes. The intense pollution that had plagued the sewage treatment facility had been temporarily mitigated, but it might have only provided a brief insight into a darker, more threatening specter, one that could potentially engulf the whole city-state. Following a swift count and assessment of the current situation, Agatha found her attention drawn by the sight of a manager who was standing nearby, showing clear signs of a thinning hairline. "Is his condition already verified?" Agatha queried. "Definitely a regular human, without question," one of the guardians affirmed with a deep, grave tone, "but he's in a state of extreme terror. We can't dismiss the potential of psychological contamination. He'll likely require a prolonged period of mental therapy and steady monitoring." "Transport him to the local chapel," Agatha commanded with a small nod, "and ensure they're informed about the grave circumstances here at the sewage treatment facility. The whole establishment needs to be subjected to a comprehensive purification and examination. It should only resume operations when we are certain that all potential threats have been meticulously addressed." "I understand, Gatekeeper," a team member acknowledged, understanding the instruction, and then looked at Agatha with a worried expression. "You didn't encounter any complications, did you?" Agatha furrowed her brows. What prompts you to ask that?" "You remained, on the other side, longer than is usual for you," the team member elaborated. "Were you successful in discovering any clues in the spirit world?" A thoughtful look crossed Agatha's faintly lined face. There was a residual sensation of overlooking something, but despite pondering over it, she couldn't pinpoint anything unusual. Could this be a lingering effect from her extended stay in the spiritual domain? She reached into her coat pocket for her habitual eye drops, but hesitated and decided against using them. Her eyes felt surprisingly fine, almost as if she had already applied the drops prior to returning to the physical world. There wasn't any unpleasant incident, she assured her team member. The abrupt emergence of those heretics was unexpected, which is why I took a bit more time to interrogate them. Unfortunately, she couldn't extract any useful information from the interrogation. The heretics were obstinate and zealous, and not even the prospect of death seemed to shake their unyielding beliefs. But what had she overlooked? A vague sensation of discomfort once again arose in Agatha's mind, but she managed to maintain her calm and composed demeanor in front of her team. Are we prepared to head back to the cathedral next? A guardian, attired in solemn, dark clothing, inquired. Yes, we are indeed journeying back to the cathedral, Agatha affirmed. It's of utmost importance that we rapidly orchestrate an extensive search of all the subterranean facilities throughout the city. The circumstances might be graver than we initially perceived. Xmas. As the cloak of evening began to unfurl, the sun initiated its slow descent towards the horizon's edge. An impressive, dual-ringed rune halo cast a brilliant radiance near the surface of the sea, while the structures of the distant city-state were incrementally tinted by the setting sun. The result was a mesmerizing scene of the entire city seemingly melting into the enveloping twilight. Duncan had stationed himself near the slender window at the distant end of the corridor on the second floor. His substantial figure almost completely obscured the light filtering in through the window. His eyes, visible through the small gaps in his bandages, silently observed the twilight horizon stretching out in the distance, his mind apparently entangled in a labyrinth of contemplations. Suddenly, the faint echo of footsteps resonated from one side. Without even pivoting his head, Duncan recognized the approaching presence. Have you finished your assigned work? He asked in a nonchalant manner. Shirley, who had just gently eased the door open and was on the brink of stealthily descending to the first-floor kitchen for a quick snack, found herself immobilized on the spot. From a nearby shadow, the trembling head of Dog materialized, muttering in a hushed tone, I knew we couldn't remain concealed. I have finished my math flashcard exercises. Shirley ignored Dog's regret-filled remark, her eyes warily darting to the imposing figure of Duncan, who stood next to the window, a formidable presence that seemed unshakable. I still have a set of vocabulary assignments left, but I'm feeling slightly peckish. Duncan discerned the distinct mix of trepidation and complaint in the young girl's voice, prompting a chuckle to escape his lips as he swiveled to face Shirley. Have I ever implied that you're not permitted to eat until you've completed your homework? Shirley retracted a little, too uncertain to formulate a response. Exhaling a sigh, Duncan turned back around to gently pat Shirley's head. Do you detest studying? He questioned, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. You give off the impression that you're undergoing some sort of torment. I tend to feel drowsy the moment I commence reading, Shirley responded in a hesitant manner, still somewhat ill at ease in her interactions with Duncan in his current state. To her, his bandages and stern, austere attire appeared more menacing than his former position as the ship's captain. I'll return to my room and resume my homework. However, Duncan gently grasped Shirley's shoulder, preventing her from hastily retreating to her room. If you're feeling weary, it's important to rest, Duncan advised, shaking his head with gentle firmness. Don't exert undue pressure on yourself to study. Shirley gazed at Duncan, her eyes wide with surprise, but she swiftly nodded in agreement, perhaps fearful that the captain might retract his seemingly lenient stance. Following a few moments of hushed silence, she stole a cautious glance at Duncan and felt compelled to voice a question that had been nudging at her mind. Why are you so persistent about me learning to read and write? I don't need to attend a university like Nina, and I certainly don't possess the aptitude to become a scholar like Mr. Morris. This marked the first instance when Duncan was confronted with this query from Shirley, but it was evident that it had been burdening her thoughts for an extended period. This young girl, who had never been enrolled in school and whose sole companion was a demon dog, clearly struggled to comprehend the captain's motives. Because knowledge equates to power, Duncan responded after a momentary pause, his gaze unwaveringly fixed on Shirley. The very concepts that you perceive as tedious and burdensome are the pillars that support our modern, civilized world. Have you never pondered how the cars that throng the streets, the machines that hum rhythmically in the factories, and the expansive ocean that unfurls beyond our city operate? Or what existence is like in distant cities across the world? Shirley mulled over his words. It seemed she had a vague notion of what the correct answer might be, but eventually, she shook her head in a tentative manner. No, I've always held the belief that having enough food to sustain oneself was enough. I didn't dedicate much thought to matters extending beyond that. But now, merely appeasing your hunger isn't sufficient, Surely. Duncan bent down to align with her eye level, engaging her gaze with serious intensity. You might not grasp the full significance of it now, but my aim is for you to experience a life that is more fulfilling. You've missed out on so many opportunities, but now that you're an integral part of our ship's crew, we'll make up for all the experiences you've been deprived of. Xness. Shirley observed Duncan with a slightly stupefied expression. She couldn't fully comprehend what the captain was endeavoring to convey, but his sincere and solemn tone transmitted a feeling of warmth. This warmth felt oddly familiar, the same type that only her parents showed during her youth. She partially understood and responded in a slow, ponderous tone, "Oh. Good." Duncan acknowledged, a smile gradually unfurling on his face as he steadily rose to his feet. Now that you've grasped the concept, feel free to grab something to eat and resume your homework. He abruptly ceased mid-sentence. Shirley, who had been eagerly anticipating his further directives, looked up in confusion. Huh? What's the matter? Duncan didn't respond immediately, instead lifting his hand and directing his focus towards the distance. His gaze seemed to traverse the length of the corridor, but his deep-set eyes hinted at a faraway meditation as if pondering over matters not present within the confines of the house. He blinked, one eye reflecting the architectural elements of the corridor and the lofty ceilings of the residence, while the other seemed to perceive a spectral ship enveloped in a haunting green fire, aimlessly adrift in a fog-infused, shadowy expanse. On board the vanished, gracefully slicing through the boundless waters of Frost's ocean, Duncan abruptly redirected his attention from the nautical chart sprawled on his desk. His sudden shift in movement instantly captivated the attention of the goat head perched at the corner of the table. It swiveled around with an audible creak. Captain, how may I be of service? Is it mealtime already? Despite our crew's currently depleted state, I am fully prepared to extend dining services to the best of my abilities. What cuisine might you prefer? We could start with southern delicacies, deep-fried meat rolls, savory pork chops, exquisite fish cakes, a variety of delectable egg dishes including grilled, steamed, boiled, stewed, pickled, and smoked eggs. Silence. I didn't divert my attention to hear you catalog an exhaustive culinary roster. Duncan cast a fleeting glance at the excessively talkative goat head, his expression cloaked in a layer of solemnity. His gaze drifted towards the window of the captain's cabin, peering in the direction of Frost as he pondered out loud, the white oak. The white oak. The goat head paused momentarily before recognition dawned. The steamship Alice once journeyed on. What provoked its mention? Do you desire to claim it as spoils of victory? I am capable of devising a comprehensive strategy for acquisition. Are you contemplating augmenting the crew? We could likely persuade the captain too. It's in close proximity, Duncan interjected, curtailing the goat head's ceaseless ramblings. He slowly rose from his seat behind the desk, his eyebrows furrowing together as he tuned into that faint yet unmistakably tangible link, close to Frost. The white oak is near Frost. The goat head abruptly halted its discourse, its voice resonating with disbelief. That's an absurd claim. Isn't Frost currently under siege? Tyrion's naval fleet has imposed a blockade on the surrounding sea routes. If a foreign vessel were in the vicinity, he would certainly inform you, wouldn't he? There's something unusual. I can indeed perceive the white oak's presence, Duncan said reflectively, but its location, it's rather nebulous and seems to oscillate intermittently. He narrowed his eyes, his gaze unyieldingly fixed on the distant sight of Frost, striving to pinpoint the sudden vivid presence that had come to his awareness. The emergence of the white oak had abruptly surfaced and exponentially intensified, much like a beacon spontaneously igniting in pitch blackness, irresistibly drawing his attention. It was an entirely novel sensation, one he hadn't encountered before. In addition to that, whether it was a figment of his imagination or a tangible reality, Duncan also perceived multiple considerable fluctuations in the ship's energy, reminiscent of a lantern sputtering capriciously in a gusty breeze. Deep in thought, he cast a contemplative glance towards the meticulously chiseled goat head on the table. Do you have any inkling of what might be unfolding? The goat head pondered for a brief moment before shaking its head. Would you prefer that I propose some dish suggestions instead? Absolutely useless when it truly counts. Duncan couldn't help but grimace as he rose from his chair, circumvented the navigation table, and commenced his approach towards the exit of the captain's cabin. Xness. Contact. 2s. Sit. Duncan did not allow himself to drift aimlessly around the ship when he emerged from the captain's cabin. Instead, his hand instinctively reached for the door handle marked, Door of the Lost. As he pulled the door open, he was met with the familiar sight of Zhou Ming's private quarters. The room was precisely as he had left it, an unchanged haven in a sea of uncertainty. It gave off a potent aura of familiarity that momentarily took him aback, as though he'd been away for much longer than he thought. True to his established routine, Zhou Ming first made his way towards the firmly closed window. He scrutinized the fine layer of dust gathered on the sill, then checked the lock's condition, making sure it was secure. Despite knowing full well the triviality of these actions, he performed them with the precision of a ritual. Afterwards, he reached for the diary hanging within arm's reach of the window, diligently recording the day's observations in a previously untouched section. The doors and windows had not been tampered with. The room had stayed pristine in his absence. Having completed this new diary entry, Zhou Ming sighed and slowly ambled towards the study desk. At that very moment, tiny emerald sparks started to flicker on the desk surface, gradually outlining an unknown form. The sparks grew in intensity, coalescing to reveal the object they were forming. The crafting process was almost at its completion, hinting at a ship. To be specific, it was a steam-powered mechanical marvel with a sleek white hull and an impressive chimney, nothing less than a remarkable feat of engineering. Zhou Ming watched this spectacle unfold with an unperturbed demeanor. The object turned out to be a miniature of the white oak, which had now inexplicably taken form inside his room. But this raised the question, why was it there? What had caused its sudden appearance? And what had become of the actual vessel? Zhou Ming's gaze then moved to a shelf in the room. There, nestled snugly among the slots of the shelf, were the miniatures of the vanished and planned, standing in silent testament to their former glory. Zhou Ming knew that objects fully enveloped by the spirit's fire, under his complete control, would materialize as exact replicas on his desk. This had been the case with the vanished and planned, and now it seemed the white oak had followed suit. Suddenly, vivid memories of his initial encounter with the white oak surged forward, overwhelming Zhou Ming's senses. The white oak had once fallen prey to Zhou Ming's spectral flame, and the entire vessel was absorbed by the vanished. But it seemed that his control over the ethereal fire had not been enough at that time. After being scorched, the white oak did not transform into a desk-side ornament like other objects but left an enduring trace mark instead. Now seated at his desk, Zhou Ming observed as the twinkling green sparks traced the last details of the white oak's outline. His expression mirrored deep contemplation. Zhou Ming was confident that he hadn't kept tabs on the white oak for quite some time and had not purposely ignited the flame mark left on the ship. Thus, the current metamorphosis wasn't a consequence of his actions, it was a voluntary change initiated by the white oak itself. Evidently, a significant event had occurred on the ship, setting off the mark left on it. The mark hadn't just been activated but had gone as far as transforming the ship into one of his cherished miniatures. His eyes narrowed in concentration as Zhou Ming once again attempted to pinpoint the exact location of the white oak and assess its current state. After a moment of intense focus, he slowly opened his eyes, a look of solemnity etched on his face. Despite his best efforts from the confines of his room, Zhou Ming found it tricky to locate the precise whereabouts of the white oak. His senses vaguely suggested it might be towards Frost, the world that lay beyond his doorstep. Moreover, as he attempted to assess the white oak's status, he received an unfamiliar response. It felt as if the ship was entirely submerged in an ocean. On the desk, the dance of the green sparks came to an end, leaving behind a beautifully detailed model of the white oak silently positioned before Zhou Ming. After a moment's hesitation, Zhou Ming extended his hand to pick up the miniature of the white oak, raising it for a more intimate inspection. However, nothing seemed amiss. After examining the model for a brief period, Zhou Ming shook his head in reluctant acceptance. He realized it was impossible to verify the ship's situation from the confines of his room. He would need to physically journey to Frost for a thorough investigation. Standing from his desk, with the white oak model in his grasp, he intended to add this new artifact to his display shelf. But he paused near a mirror, his eyes reflecting deep thought as he scrutinized his own reflection. What returned his gaze was not the reflection of the white oak, but rather a unique ship shrouded in a dense, ominous mist. The ship's silhouette, mirrored in the glass, bore an uncanny resemblance to the white oak. It was as if they were twins, cast from the same die. However, this reflected ship emanated an enigmatic, almost otherworldly aura. The hull was marred by signs of significant damage and long-term neglect, suggesting that it had rested on the seabed for countless years. Zhou Ming switched his gaze between the ship in the mirror and the model in his hand, confirming that the object he held was indeed just the model of the white oak. After a fleeting moment of surprise and contemplation, Zhou Ming hastily put the white oak model down. He moved decisively towards the display shelf, picked up the models of the vanished and the planned, and meticulously inspected each one in the mirror's reflection. However, neither of them changed in the mirror. The white oak stood as the lone exception, revealing a mysterious doppelganger in the mirror's reflection. Zhou Ming once again positioned the white oak model before the mirror, his gaze thoughtfully studying the darkened ship that shimmered back at him from the reflective surface. It seemed as though the mirror was showing a parallel dimensions, reflection, of the white oak. Engrossed in his contemplation, he slowly stretched his hand towards the mirrored phantom, only to meet the cold, unyielding surface of the mirror. Meanwhile, at the wheel of the ship, Lawrence found himself dwarfed by the foreboding silhouette of the black oak. The shadow-laden fog gradually closed in around him, engulfing his form. The lantern hung precariously at the ship's bow, its weak light making a futile attempt to pierce through the all-consuming darkness and etch out a path forward. Casting a glance over his shoulder, Lawrence could barely discern the white oak, which now looked like a faint ghost hidden in the foggy distance. Even though the two vessels had appeared closely linked from the White Oak's bridge, he now felt an immeasurable gulf separating them. This chasm was not merely physical distance but seemed like a divide between the realms of the real and the surreal, and he was gradually navigating his way through this spectral schism. His mindset stabilized as the surroundings grew more peculiar and the darkness ever more engulfing. It was as if the path had been revealed, and fate had laid out all the choices before him. He was steadfast in his decision to board the Black Oak, regardless of the unknowns it held. However, it appeared as though he was the sole passenger capable of maintaining his equanimity. Another occupant of the boat was far from experiencing the same tranquility. "Please, I beg of you, let me go. If necessary, bind me and hoist me up the mast," implored Anomaly 077 incessantly. This figure, resembling a living mummy, had been chattering incessantly. "As long as I can retreat back to my slumber, I'm willing to comply with any request you have, even if it entails devoting myself to the storm goddess, or perhaps even the god of death. I simply cannot endure this relentless wakefulness any longer." For the first time since their departure, Lawrence finally addressed the mummy's pleas. "You're willing to submit yourself to a deity." Taken aback, the mummy halted momentarily before energetically nodding. "If it means I can resume my sleep, I'm ready to declare my loyalty to any god, even within the realm of my dreams." Reflecting on this for a moment, a well-known sailor's jest sprang to Lawrence's mind. A smile began to play upon his lips. "Well then, how about considering an oath to the god of wisdom?" Anomaly 077 appeared momentarily baffled, and after a beat, it managed to croak out a response through its parched throat. "I suppose I could initiate my devotion by immersing myself in the intricacies of plane geometry." "Even contemplating allegiance to the god of wisdom, your desperation is indeed profound," Lawrence observed, shaking his head in amused fascination. "But what exactly spurs this fear in you? From the data I've gathered, you're classified as an anomaly prone to losing control, yet here you are, desperate to revert to your dormant state. Why is that?" In response, Anomaly 077 merely recoiled further into a corner of the modest boat, its gaze brimming with unease while fixated on the faint green flame dancing on Lawrence. Shifting his eyes down to his transformed body, Lawrence looked up again and asked, "Is it this flame that incites your terror? Or perhaps it's the latent power that this flame symbolizes?" With a low grumble, Anomaly 077 retorted, "Isn't it self-evident? I didn't anticipate an anomaly such as yourself being aware of the reputation of the vanished." Lawrence mused. "The intel on you suggested that you retain self-awareness and possess the capacity to interact with others even post your loss of control. Yet your consciousness seems far more advanced than initially assumed. Had you not been mummified, I might have even mistaken you for a human. Seemingly resigned, Anomaly 077 lowered its head and fell silent. However, Lawrence wasn't perturbed by Sailor's reaction. He was faced with a plethora of mysteries to unravel, and one eccentric anomaly contradicting the pre-existing data seemed inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. So much was still shrouded in uncertainty, so many secrets yearned to be discovered. When was the last time he had been engulfed by such exhilarating anticipation? It seemed as though the thrill-seeking Lawrence had evaporated from the world when he took leave from the Black Oak. The enchantment of the unexplored, the allure of the remote, had receded into the realm of nostalgia until this moment. Upon locking his gaze with the Black Oak once again, the dormant sense of adventure within Lawrence was stirred, rekindling in the heart of the seasoned seafarer. Lifting his gaze, he found the intimidating silhouette of the Black Oak now looming mere meters away from their modest vessel. He steered their boat closer, halting at a location that triggered a distinct memory, and lightly tapped the ship's hull with his oar. This action elicited a response from above. A rope ladder was unfurled and lowered down. Lawrence pivoted, his eyes seeking out Anomaly 077, who remained huddled in the boat's corner. The time has come to ascend the ship, sailor. With some hesitation, Anomaly 077 rose, bowing its head in surrender. As you wish, Captain. Contact. 2's, sitemap. Grasping the rungs of the rope ladder with an iron-clad hold, Lawrence began his ascent, methodically pulling himself upward with each laborious movement. Each step brought him closer to the formidable exterior of the ship, which loomed above him like an ominous beast. The vessel was aptly named the Black Oak. Its hull was cloaked in darkness as profound as the midnight sky, a hue so intense it seemed as though it had been scorched by a searing flame, leaving behind a charred, somber shade. After a grueling and physically taxing climb, Lawrence finally hauled himself onto the ship's deck. The moment his boots made contact with the worn wooden planks of the deck, an overwhelming wave of exhaustion washed over him. He found himself doubled over, his hands braced on his knees for support, his breath coming in ragged gasps. A self-deprecating chuckle bubbled up from his chest as he heaved for air, a rueful acknowledgement of the fact that his strength was not what it once had been. Age had undeniably caught up with him. The undeniable proof lay in his struggle to complete a task as seemingly simple as climbing a rope ladder, an act that now required a period of rest and recovery. His mind drifted back to his youth, a time when his introspective reverie was cut short by the sound of footsteps resonating behind him. Shaking off the unwelcome onslaught of nostalgia, Lawrence shifted his focus to Anomaly 077, a peculiar entity that had managed to scale the intimidating exterior of the Black Oak. The figure, more akin to a mummified corpse than a man, lingered near the edge of the deck, displaying an unexpected level of compliance. Despite its daunting appearance, this creature, formerly a man, had shown a remarkable willingness to cooperate throughout their journey. Lawrence found it strange to see such a fearsome anomaly, so high-level in its destructive potential, acting with such apparent obedience. However, given the unsettling reality that this dreadful mummy was his only ally in this exploratory endeavor, Lawrence put his reservations aside and adopted an air of stern authority. Is the boat secure? He demanded, treating the creature as though it were an indispensable member of his trusted crew. Secured, came the mummy's response, its voice a deep, gravelly rumble. The figure's eyes, hollow and sunken, flickered around the vacant ship before it spoke again, its words marked by a touch of hesitation. It seems there's no one else on board, Captain. I'm not blind, snapped Lawrence, his tone laced with sarcasm, as he cast his own scrutinizing gaze around the deck. The atmosphere aboard the Black Oak was thick with a peculiar fog, which seemed to drape the ship in a gloomy shroud. The fog didn't appear to be growing denser, but it certainly complicated efforts to take in the full details of the ship. Peering through the mist, Lawrence strained to make out the ship's layout, which appeared uncannily similar to his own vessel, the White Oak. The resemblance was striking, with roughly 70 to 80% similarity. However, unlike his well-maintained ship, the Black Oak exhibited signs of severe neglect. Patches of paint flaked off the railings, the deck planks were twisted and warped, and stains that looked eerily like rust speckled the ship's structure. In the absence of the spooky fog, Lawrence could have easily mistaken the Black Oak for a long-abandoned version of his own ship, the White Oak. It was as though he had stepped into an alternate reality where his beloved vessel had been left to drift aimlessly, forgotten, and succumbing slowly to the relentless assault of time and weather. Indeed, the mummy's observations were spot on. There was no other living soul on this ship. It was completely devoid of life, adding to the eerie silence that enveloped them. But if there's no one else here, then who dropped down the rope ladder? Anomaly 077 broke the silence, voicing his perplexity. And when you signaled this ship, someone, or something, responded with a light. Who was behind that? Lawrence turned to regard the sailor, a hint of admiration creeping into his expression. For an anomaly, your thought process is surprisingly logical, he mused aloud. But isn't it a bit odd to apply such logic to a ghost ship? The creature, this anomaly 077, merely responded with a nonchalant shrug, lapsing into an unsettling silence. But Lawrence wasn't content with allowing the mummy to wallow in his silence. He hadn't brought anomaly 077 all the way to the Black Oak just to avoid the potential risk of leaving him aboard the White Oak. He had intentions to harness this anomaly's unique abilities. Can you exercise your abilities on this ship? Lawrence questioned, his gaze boring into the creature, striving to decipher the enigma before him. Can you influence this ship? Do you want me to usurp it? Anomaly 077 responded, his mummified features revealing a flicker of surprise. No, I don't expect you to usurp it, Lawrence corrected him firmly, but I want you to gauge if your abilities can operate effectively here. Can you sense the current state of this ship? Anomaly 077, also known as the Sailor, possessed a peculiar power. He had the ability to control, and in some circumstances, usurp anything that fell under the classification of a ship. This made him a unique entity, granting him an unparalleled understanding and influence over ships that far exceeded the comprehension of a normal human. Could it be that the Black Oak would reveal some unusual characteristics under the sailor's scrutiny? Lawrence was eager to exploit Anomaly 77's abilities to unravel the mystery of the Black Oak. Obediently, the mummy complied with Lawrence's command. He stood there on the weather-beaten deck, his arms stretched out, his eyes half closed as if he was trying to read the wind direction in the midst of the enveloping fog. Meanwhile, Lawrence's gaze roved over the array of familiar items strewn about the ship's deck. The Black Oak, he was finally aboard the vessel that had haunted his dreams for years. Despite the countless times he had revisited the past incidents on this ship in his dreams, the memories remained as sharp and as vivid as ever, refusing to fade with time. His life had been shaped by numerous voyages, spurred by an unwavering determination to locate this ship. But now, standing on its deck, he was assaulted by a flood of uncertainties, questioning his judgment, doubting his perceptions, and even pondering over the very existence of this ship. The sudden appearance of the Black Oak was profoundly strange and filled with suspicion. Its current state was anything but ordinary. Despite a part of him emotionally resisting the thought, logic suggested that this might not be the Black Oak he had been relentlessly searching for. Perhaps it was merely a manifestation, created by some erratic supernatural anomaly that was beyond his control. His mind swirled with confusion and uncertainty until the look of utter bewilderment reflected in the sailor's wide eyes brought him back to reality. What's the situation? Lawrence asked without delay. I don't know how to put it, the sailor stammered, his gaze fixated on the deck beneath his feet, a visible display of confusion creasing his brow. Captain, I can't feel the existence of this ship. What do you mean you can't sense the ship's existence? Lawrence exclaimed in disbelief, his eyes mirroring his shock. He had contemplated the possibility that the sailor's abilities might fall short against this peculiar ghost ship, but he hadn't predicted such an odd disclosure. Then where on earth are we standing? I'm sorry, sir, I can't give a proper explanation. The sailor seemed somewhat startled by Lawrence's reaction but stood his ground. We are indeed standing here. This place definitely exists, but in my perception, it doesn't, or at least, it isn't here. Puzzlement etched itself across Lawrence's face. He was certain that the mummy wasn't attempting to fool him, his words were a genuine reflection of his perception. But this knowledge did little to alleviate Lawrence's disarray. After an internal deliberation, he took a deep breath, lifted his lantern high, and directed his gaze towards a specific point at the far end of the deck. The gentle, golden glow from the lantern trembled amidst the fog, seemingly mapping out an invisible path ahead. Captain, where are we going? The sailor asked. To the bridge, Lawrence replied calmly, the captain should be on the bridge. As his statement hung in the cool, dense air, he proceeded along the illuminated path. The sailor paused momentarily before hastening to catch up, his stride slightly awkward due to an evident limp. A hint of curiosity threaded his voice as he inquired, you mean, the captain of this ship? Are you familiar with the captain of the Black Oak? Lawrence's stride faltered momentarily before he continued his trek. Yes, one know her quite well. The sailor simply nodded in acknowledgement, slipping back into a respectful silence. Within moments, Lawrence found himself standing before the entrance to the ship's bridge. A red metal door, slightly ajar, loomed before him as if silently inviting him to step inside. You open the door. With the lantern securely held in one hand, Lawrence deftly drew a revolver from his waistband with his other hand, signaling for the mummy at his side to make a move. All right, the mummy, obediently heaving a sigh of resignation, stepped forward. He gripped the door handle and, without any exertion, pushed the door open. Looking inside, Lawrence discovered an abandoned bridge. It was utterly devoid of any signs of human presence. A thin layer of fog whimsically danced around the chairs and navigation equipment. At the front of the bridge, the unmanned ship's wheel gently rocked back and forth as if self-steering its course. There's no one here either, the mummy stated, a hint of disappointment seeping into his voice. I can see that, Lawrence responded, his tone touched with dry sarcasm as he stepped into the bridge. Holding up his lantern, he cast out the creeping shadows that sought refuge in the corners. His eyes rapidly swept over the weather-beaten equipment and vacant seats, finally settling on the ship's helm. The captain should have been here. But there was no trace of the captain. Lawrence allowed himself a moment of silent introspection, releasing a sigh heavy with both disappointment and a strange sense of relief. Ah, as expected, you're not here. No, I'm here. A voice, chillingly soft and unmistakably feminine, echoed from the side. Taken by surprise, Lawrence felt a shiver creep down his spine. The uncanny green flame that constantly clung to his body, defying any attempts at extinguishment, surged several inches higher. In the very next second, he spun around, his gaze instantly drawn to the source of the voice. A woman stood there, seemingly in her prime, donned in a captain's uniform. Her waves of hair cascaded over her shoulders, her arms were crossed over her chest, and her face, while maintaining a composed expression, hinted at a deep-seated resignation. Ah, a woman has materialized, Anomaly 077 exclaimed in surprise, and then, quickly registering the gravity of the situation, shot a quick, questioning glance at Lawrence. Captain, should I remain silent? Lawrence shot the mummy a brief glare. Yes, stay silent. Understood, Captain. Though it was poorly timed, Anomaly 77's interruption did serve to diffuse some of the palpable tension that hung heavily in the air. Lawrence capitalized on this brief respite to regain his composure, his mind buzzing as he pondered on how to break the ice. What should he say first? In the past, he had engaged in countless conversations with Martha. They had shared many imaginary years together in his illusions. Yet, in this crucial moment, Lawrence found himself at a loss for words. He couldn't converse with Martha as effortlessly as he had in his dreams. This momentary hesitation led him to a jarring realization. The Martha standing before him now was a unique entity, existing completely outside the confines of his subconscious mind. For an extended period of time, Lawrence had found himself inhabiting a reality that bore striking resemblance to a constant, conscious dream. It was as if he had been enshrouded in a vibrant mirage where he was in complete control of his senses, acutely aware of everything happening around him. He was experiencing an intense transformation of his psyche, a process that he understood with a depth and intensity unmatched by others. It was clear to Lawrence that Martha, the woman who once played a significant role in his life, was now absent. The constant spectral companion that shadowed his every waking moment turned out to be nothing more than a fabrication of his mind, a painful truth that he couldn't shake off. Regardless of whether it was on a subconscious or conscious level, his mental perceptiveness was remarkably profound. In comparison to other sea captains of his generation and level of expertise, his mental resilience was praiseworthy. Within the boundless vastness of the sea, it was not unusual to encounter sea captains plagued by distorted mental states and an increasingly tenuous grasp on their sanity. Despite the spiritual support provided by priests who traveled with these maritime voyagers, the profession of seafaring was inherently laced with more psychological risks than an average sailor might encounter. These sea captains embarked on countless journeys, constantly wrestling with their deteriorating mental health to such a degree that they often defined their profession with a spine-chilling saying, "We are not just teetering on the brink of the abyss. Instead, we are being thrust headlong into its gaping maw." But it was due to the mental torment he had been subjected to over the years that Lawrence developed an unusually keen insight into the phantasmal, Martha. He had an acute awareness that the figure he was now seeing was not similar to the hallucinations he had experienced before. His mind wandered back to the vision of Martha that had materialized on the deck of the ship, the White Oak, a while back. On that day, First Mate Gus had also witnessed the spectral apparition of Martha. Could that have been a crucial turning point? Had everything finally crossed an unseen threshold? Had the figments of his imagination finally taken on a physical form? Or had some mysterious force delved into his psyche and brought this tangible entity into existence? Was this a blessing cloaked in malice? Or perhaps, a snare imbued with mockery? Martha, Lawrence finally broke the stifling silence, his voice rough and choked due to his dry throat. Are you truly here, standing in front of me? As you can see, the feminine figure retorted with a chuckle, would you like to touch me? I'm even warm to the touch. You are tangibly present. Lawrence breathed in deeply, holding back his impulse to step closer, but why? Has a mental projection of mine taken on a physical form? Is this the might of the sea? You're partially correct, Martha gently denied with a slight shake of her head. Yes, this sea has shaped me, as it has the Black Oak, but I'm not a mere manifestation of your imagination. I've been aimlessly drifting here for many years, Lawrence. The ship and I are merely two among countless imposters, lost and adrift. Lawrence froze for a moment, visibly startled. Imposters. Indeed, imposters, all conjured by a formidable force lying deep within the sea. I can't exactly define what this force is, but it has been present here for an unfathomable length of time, spawning innumerable duplicates. Remember the seagull that you obliterated not so long ago? And Dagger Island. All of them are imposters. Lawrence's eyes bulged in shock. The revelation hit him hard. He suddenly grasped that the chaos he found himself embroiled in was far more malevolent and terrifying than he had initially comprehended. Wait, the Frost we encountered before. Yes, that too. Everything here is an impostor, Martha confirmed calmly. This unknown force has thoroughly permeated this region, and anything that remains here for long enough succumbs to its replication. There are numerous aimless and vacant copies floating aimlessly in the fathomless depths of the sea. What you've come across is merely the tip of the iceberg. It seemed that Lawrence had been plunged into a trance, and it took him a while to gather himself. He stared in disbelief at the apparition of his wife before him. But, you seem different, you're capable of conversation, the ship just fought alongside the White Oak. Rather than answer, Martha merely granted Lawrence a serene and inscrutable smile. He stopped speaking, gradually regaining his composure. He cast his gaze down, observing his own spectral, translucent form and the quiet, green flame flickering on his body. The Black Oak had come into being after the White Oak had undergone its transformation, amidst the flames. You've made the connection, Lawrence. Martha's voice was soft. The only thing that can withstand a force as potent as another force of greater power. Not even this sea can influence the spoils of the vanished fleet. You and I were both his spoils. As Lawrence listened, he found himself in a daze, feeling a twinge of disorientation. Suddenly, he noticed a shift in his expression as he registered the inconsistencies in Martha's recent disclosures. These were pieces of information that the Martha he had said goodbye to decades ago should not have known. How was she privy to information about the vanished? How could she know that the White Oak was Captain Duncan's spoils? You've accessed my consciousness. Lawrence's eyes widened in sudden understanding, his muscles involuntarily stiffening. You're not the real Martha. The figure standing a few feet away simply smiled in response, unperturbed by Lawrence's reaction, as placid as she had been all those years ago. If you're looking for an exact, unadulterated, version of Martha, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you, Lawrence, I'm not her. However, a part of her does exist within me. Martha's essence is a component of me, and the remaining part is extracted from your consciousness and memories. The sea acts like a mirror, constantly reflecting everything that passes over its surface, including consciousness and memories. I didn't intrude upon your consciousness, rather your consciousness naturally imprinted a part of itself onto me. Can you accept that? Lawrence parted his lips to respond, his face a tableau of mixed emotions. Finally, he managed to conjure a melancholic smile, raising his hands in resignation. I don't know. I never contemplated how I would react upon truly confronting you. I'm uncertain how to deal with this variant of you. I'm still confused about the nature of your existence. He raised his gaze, and for the first time, the veteran sea captain, who had weathered innumerable terrifying ordeals in the boundless sea, appeared a bit lost. He rarely let his guard down in front of anyone, except his wife. Martha silently studied the no longer young Lawrence. After a prolonged silence, she let out a small chuckle. You're exactly as you used to be, always seeking my advice in pivotal moments. She stepped forward, raised her warm hand, and placed it on Lawrence's shoulder. You need to remain resolute and make informed decisions. Lawrence's brows knitted slightly, a look of bewilderment sweeping across his face. Excuse me, sir, Martha turned to address the unusually quiet Anomaly 077. The master of the vanished fleet would greatly appreciate your collaboration. The cadaver clothed in sailor's attire shuddered, wordlessly turned around, and left the bridge. A wave of understanding seemed to wash over Lawrence and he quickly called out, wait. But the bridge door had already shut behind the departing figure. Anomaly 077 darted swiftly down the corridor beyond the door. He faintly heard Captain Lawrence's final outcry from within, Martha, I'm over 60 this year. He didn't have the heart to eavesdrop on the conversation that followed. A short while later, the creak of the door hinge announced someone's exit. Anomaly 077 recoiled, cautiously turning his head just in time to see the female explorer standing in the doorway, an uninhibited, merry grin adorning her face. Close on her heels, Lawrence too stepped out, grimacing noticeably. Upon noticing Anomaly 077 by the door, he shot him a sharp warning look. He quickly grabbed his cheek, wincing even more profoundly. Anomaly 077 immediately diverted his gaze, attempting to meld into the scenery as a real corpse might. Clearly, he had been subjected to a harsh reprimand. Have you come to terms with it now? Martha pivoted her head to ask Lawrence, her face highlighted by a beaming smile. Lawrence, cradling the tender spot on his head, couldn't comprehend how Martha could inflict such potent blows on his nearly ethereal form. All he knew was that these subtleties were no longer important. I can accept it, I can accept it. In the boundless sea, one needed a broad-minded perspective to tackle all surprises thrown their way. After all, as it presently stood, if he couldn't handle it, Martha would step in to aid him. The female explorer's forthright demeanor remained unchanged from all those years ago while he had matured into a man in his mid-50s. So, next, we should concentrate on the urgent issues at hand, Martha proposed with a smile, leaning casually against the door with her arms crossed. Remaining trapped here isn't a feasible long-term solution. Upon hearing this, Lawrence quickly brushed aside his intricate contemplations, his expression swiftly morphing into one of stern solemnity. Martha, I've been wanting to ask you, what exactly is the state of this sea? Do you have any information about a way out of here? I wish I could provide the answers you're seeking, but I'm afraid I have to apologize, Martha replied after a moment's pause. Even though I've been aimlessly drifting here for many years, in the end, I and this ship are merely one of the innumerable counterfeits trapped here. However, one thing I am sure of, the entirety of the sea is centered around frost. If there indeed exists a portal that intersects with the real world, it's most likely situated within frost. Contact. 2's, sitemap.